This will be an attempt for me to weigh in on the ongoing WikiLeaks controversy. Mostly what I want to try to do is to put the current events into a broader historical context, which I think provides some insights as to how we should proceed. I'll do this by noting that this year marks the 50th anniversary of Amnesty International, founded in 1961. This will be celebrated in the States next week at the annual general meeting in San Francisco, which sadly I won't be attending. For those not familiar with Amnesty, or even those that are, it's quite remarkable what it meant when it came into existence a half-century ago. It was really something entirely new to the world. We had a grassroots, non-governmental, transnational organization working on behalf of human rights everywhere. It wasn't beholden to any particular country, and in fact, it had a difficult time operating in the countries for which it initially had members. Its mandate was actually quite simple and limited then. It was chartered to work on behalf of the freedom of people who were imprisoned solely for the nonviolent expression of their political or their religious beliefs. It's hard to imagine that would cause alarm or consternation in anyone, but of course it was rabidly opposed by repressive regimes all around the world. In fact, one of the interesting things about early Amnesty work was that members were restricted from writing or taking actions having to do with their own country. These were commonly referred to as own country restrictions. And that was because to be a member of Amnesty in many places was to be considered to be a threat against the local order. And in spite of the fact that Amnesty established itself early on as a dispassionate, scholarly, almost academic organization conducting careful research into the human rights abuses that it was exposing, it was often cast as one-sided and biased in any number of issues, but specifically those, for example, having to do with Palestinian human rights. Amnesty worked then and continues to work now through a very old-fashioned method of letter writing, pen and paper. It's the common instruments used by Amnesty members, and at the time most information was passed back and forth by photocopies, maybe some faxes every now and then. What's happened in the intervening years is that the flow of information has been expedited in an unbelievable way by the internet and digital global communications, emails and tweets and videos and blogs and all sorts of online resources have replaced or at least augmented what was being done with pen and paper. And so what we've seen happen is a significant globalization of information relating to political activities of non-governmental organizations and groups. And this has resulted in a massively distributed resource of expertise, investigative capability, and the opportunity to report on human rights abuses and other concerns. The fact of the matter is that this globalization of information is not going away. The genie cannot be put back in the bottle. And WikiLeaks, to some extent, represents a natural evolution of this trend that started with Amnesty International 50 years ago. I'm not trying to say that WikiLeaks is a successor to Amnesty International, but what I am trying to say is that it is part and parcel with a global information exchange capability that exists, and that we can either choose to use constructively or we can choose to try to ignore or fight against. And I think this is specifically my take on WikiLeaks and the current controversy, and that is that the globalization of information is a fact of life, and it is effectively a force of nature, like many other globalization processes. To work against it is to live in a bygone fantasy world and to ignore tremendous opportunities as far as utilizing in order to create better things for international relations and for people around the world. So I think the U.S. really was faced with a couple of ways to respond to WikiLeaks. It could have it could have done what it chose to do, which is to treat it as an unwelcome intruder on its national security apparatus, which is sort of sad because the real problem that the U.S. needed to address had to do with its laughable security, its laughable security network, and its bizarrely bloated classification system. That would have been a constructive approach, at least as far as its own internal reforms. Instead, it chose to work aggressively to try to contain or to defeat WikiLeaks. Again, it's not clear how one would go about doing this. WikiLeaks is one of any number of organizations that could be providing the same kind of functions. And this really was a big mistake, and it was a big mistake for any number of reasons. It was doomed to failure. There's no turning back the clock on globalized information. If WikiLeaks wasn't going to distribute this information, somebody else was. And so there was a missed opportunity, which hopefully hasn't passed entirely. But this is an opportunity to begin to look toward the future and set up collaborative arrangements for minimizing unintended harms that might occur through the distribution of information, such as the cables that WikiLeaks came into possession of. The fact of the matter is that somebody is going to be distributing this information, and if they have standing and credibility and are known for minimizing unintended harm, then leakers are probably going to be more likely to turn to them, at least people who leak in good faith and aren't trying to cause havoc. So that's an interest on the part of WikiLeaks or similar organizations. And it's also in the interest on the part of governments like the U.S. You can either be part of a consultative process which tries to minimize harm, or you can walk away from it and then basically let the chips fall where they may. The alternative really is the information becomes an information free-for-all, and everything is being released by anybody without any type of protections or redaction. I believe that WikiLeaks, although they're imperfect and they made errors in their releases, was inclined to work for harm minimization. Maybe they didn't do a perfect job, but I do think that was their inclination. And now there's no channels of communication open between them and the U.S. government, which seems to me to be the worst of all possible outcomes. So again, I don't know, it seems like the U.S. foreign policy seems to target missing great opportunities, but here is an opportunity to work toward the future with an inevitable international fixture, and that was a globalized information distribution medium, our journalist source. And instead, we basically destroyed or potentially destroyed all opportunities to do that. It's a real mistake. The other mistake that the U.S. has made with regard to the WikiLeaks controversy, and the one that I want to close on, brings me back to my work with Amnesty International over the years. The U.S. government has taken the opportunity in pursuing the WikiLeaks case to persecute an individual, namely Bradley Manning, who is alleged to be the source of many of the documents that WikiLeaks circulated. He is being held in inhumane conditions in a naval brig in Qaunitco, Virginia, and as far as I can tell from the information that Amnesty International has provided in their action alerts, the conditions that he's held in are not only cruel and inhumane, but they are also in violation of international norms. So I'm going to close by asking people to check the description area And I have an address for Secretary of Defense William Gates and a very short sample letter that people can write. It would be nice for a change, and perhaps as a commemoration of Amnesty International's 50th birthday, to actually fill out a postcard or write a letter. In the day of email and all sorts of electronic communications, I feel as though these still have a significant impact. And I would appreciate it if you could take the time and the expense of a stamp, an international stamp if need be, in order to send a letter to try to alleviate the conditions that Bradley Manning is experiencing in his imprisonment. And I'm going to close as usual by saying, let's remember we are all in this together.